Another year is dawning. Dear Father, let it be. In working or in waiting, another year with Thee. Another year of progress, another year of praise, another year of proving Thy presence all the days. Another year of mercies, of faithfulness and grace. Another year of gladness, the glory of Thy face. Another year of leaning upon Thy loving breast. Another year of trusting, of quiet, happy rest. Another year of service, of witness for Thy love. Another year of training for holier work above. Another year is dawning. Dear Father, let it be on heaven or on earth or else in heaven. Another year for Thee. This poem was written, obviously, with the new year in mind. And while our new year may be a few days old, I wanted this morning, just in a standalone sermon, to look at a very familiar passage. Because, you see, the one thing that the poet did not mention, in terms of what should describe our year, is that it is another year to run the race that is Christianity. Not just Christianity, but the faithfulness that should describe our Christianity. The Hebrew writer mentions at the end of his long sermon, in one of his concluding remarks, that we need to run with endurance the race that is set before us. I would ask you for a moment, for all of those of us who have gone down into the water with Jesus, and to allow Jesus to work on our heart and our mind and to circumcise and cut away all the sin and all of the discretions and everything else that has happened in our life, to remove it, to forgive it, to cast it away from hopefully our heart and our mind, and certainly from the memory of God, to remember the day you decided to start the race. Because you see, the starting of the Christian race isn't when we decide on a Sunday to get up and to go to a service. The start of the race was the moment we came out of the water. In other words, baptism is not an end, but it is a beginning. And it is a beginning of a race that does not end until we leave this life. A life that should be lived for God, and as the poet said, a life that should be lived, whether it's a brand new day or a brand new year, another day and another year with God as the focus. Now, if you're taking notes and you like to write in the margin of your Bible, or you have a little notepad and you want to circle that word race, or you want to write it down, that is translated as a conflict, a term that is used throughout the New Testament by the Apostle Paul to describe conflict, to describe struggle, and something that's not new to our ears, that this race is not an easy race. It's not something that we get to set a cruise on. As great as it may be to be able to press a little button in our cars that brought us here this morning, and to set a speed, and to be constant in that speed, and if you have even a more technologically advanced car, to be able to pump the brakes for you to slow you down, or to speed up for you without pressing another button. Many of you remember those cars when it came out, you had to actually press the plus or the minus to speed up or to slow down. Now the car will do it for you. It's real easy to think that when it comes to Christianity, especially those of us who have been in it for quite a while, to start cruising, to start coasting. That we want it to be as easy as it possibly can be. And the Spirit of God, through the Apostle Paul, uses a word that, even though it's translated from the original into our English language as the word race, it is important to know that he is using a word that is going to describe a race that is full of conflict and that is full of struggle. It is hard. It is difficult. He is not going to pull the wool over our eyes. He's not going to beat around the bush. It's difficult to be faithful. It's difficult to continue to run that race. It's difficult to meet that struggle and to meet that conflict. So I want to put it in ways that we'd understand, and this is something that I came across. Is actually Anne-Marie and Grace and I were riding in the car. Does anybody know the significance of this, Lord willing, this upcoming Friday, January 10th? Does anybody know the significance of this Friday, It's upcoming Friday, January 10th. And no, that is not, I'm not asking that in terms of the last day of the work week. What is the significance of this date? It's actually something that started in 2019. We heard this on the radio. Did you know that it is National Quitters Day? National Quitters Day. And it was started because that is the assumption where the beginning of the end of New Year's resolution starts to take place. Now you can Google, you can read all sorts of articles, and it'll tell you how long resolutions last. But the radio, and I'll say we can believe what these people are saying on the radio, right? Can we do that? Is that a safe assumption? You're shaking your head, no, I shouldn't do that. We'll do that for this moment. Let's say they're accurate. You see how pessimistic we are. National Quitters Day, 2025 is this upcoming Friday. And they ask the question, why is it that people quit their resolutions at that moment? Why is it that is either they make a full-on quit or it's the beginning, the process of quitting? And they came up with all sorts of reasons, and of course they're accurate because we probably, without telling anybody, we probably would be able to empathize with some of those reasons. One, just simply we don't have the habit. We just don't have the habit. We just think that we can just start. We can jump into the deep end of the pool and we'll be able to swim right away. Habits take time. I want this habit. Some of us even want to have a resolution of creating new habits. But they all take time, an average of 30 days to cultivate, to start and to cultivate just one brand new habit. Sometimes we just don't have the habit of being able to stick with anything, and so it gets tough, it gets difficult, something got in the way, and it's just a lot easier to cash it in and just to quit. For some, they just never really specified what it is, and they could never really measure, well, I want to read my Bible more. Okay. Well, there's 66 books. Which book do you want to read? You want to read Isaiah? You want to read the book of Psalms? In other words, they never really specified that I want to read my Bible more and I'm going to begin by reading 2 verses a day, 5 verses a day, 10 verses a day, a chapter a day. It's kind of the idea. They never give themselves anything in which they can measure themselves by, because again, it's not about just doing it right away, because there's no such thing as picking up where I left off. We never really specify. We never really have a measurement to be able to give ourselves, not to make us feel bad, but just to be able to have progress. We're never really as specific as we probably think we should be and can be. For others, I thought this was interesting. The lady on the radio said that many of us will make too many resolutions. We'll overload ourselves. I want to read my Bible more. I want to pray more. I want to go to church more. I want to eat better. Well, that's 4 right there. You know how difficult those 4 are if you wanted to just do them all at the same time? It's just difficult. I'm making excuses. It's just difficult. You know what happens when any and all of us get overloaded with anything? Is we shut down. And it's just hard to start right back up. It's easier to quit. So we decided as a nation, or somebody somewhere decided that the second Friday of January since 2019, we'll just call it National Quitters Day. Now, I think about Hebrews 12:1 and running the race with endurance, and you know that the goal of Satan is to get us to quit. It is to get us to quit. The great thing about the Hebrew writer in Hebrews 12:1 is that he describes for us 2 key ways in what the devil uses to try to get us to quit. Things that he goes ahead and says, I know the race is hard, I know the race is difficult, but I'm going to go ahead and identify the potholes that are there. I'm going to identify the hills that you got to run and climb. I'm going to identify all the things that you're going to have to deal with. And really all of those things can be condensed to 2 things. And one is that there are weights. There are weights. It's important to know the distinction, and we'll talk a lot more about this. He's going to make a distinction between weight and sin. There's some of the things that we deal with and that we struggle with in this life that encumber us, that weigh us down in our heart and in our mind and in our life, that bring us to a brink, that maybe not literally to a Friday, January 10th, but it brings us to a January. It brings us into a specific day on our calendar where in our heart and in our mind, the better option is to quit than it is to go on. And sometimes has nothing to do with sin. Sometimes it's just a simple weight. I would imagine that if we took a good, long, hard look at last year when it came to us running our race, we could identify some of the weights. Maybe not unique to us, maybe some that are shared by all of us, but everybody here struggling with something that's weighing us down. And again, it's not the category of sin, it's just there. Some of us are still struggling with being in too much of a hurry. We're just busy. And we're not productive, but we're busy. But we wear our busyness like a badge of honor. And we'll wear it like a virtue. It's a busy season for us right now. Until you realize that a season turns into 2 seasons, to turns into 3 seasons, to turn into 4 seasons, and next thing you know, you don't remember the last time you and your family weren't busy. You probably remember the last time you and your family weren't productive, but when was the last time you weren't busy? Busyness, that's a virtue and that's a badge of secular society. That's a weight that a lot of us are carrying around that we have no need to carry around. That busyness and that hurry. And it's hard. It's hard. I'm not saying that there is no concept of that. There are seasons. There are truly seasons where you have to be on the go for work and for family. It's just part of it. But church, we don't have to be on the go 24/7, 365. And if you haven't slowed down in a while and need to, you don't have to say yes to everything. Your kids don't have to be part of everything. You and your family don't have to do everything. Every hour does not have to be spoken for. Every day does not need to have something written in on the calendar. There doesn't need to be a reminder set for 5 weeks from now, this is what we're going to be doing. If that option exists. There are things that you must plan for. I get that. We're not talking about the things that you have to do. These are the things that we have been deceived into believing that we have to do. And what we probably found ourselves doing, and this is just an example, there are all kinds of weights that exist, but what we probably found ourselves doing, again, if we take a good, long, hard look, is that we actually did practice saying no. We just said no to all the things that are good for our souls. And we said no to the things that are good for the souls of our family. And we said no to the things that are good for the souls of the church. And we found more time for things that do not help the race than we did for things that do. And we ran some hills and climbed some mountains that I wonder if God just looked at me and said, why are we doing this again? Why is this the mountain that we got to climb? There are enough mountains. And there are enough hills. Why are we taking on more when it's all it's going to do is end up breaking us? And so the word of the Hebrew writer is that Satan loves to work through these things that we believe that we have to. And maybe they just start out as a simple thing. Something that we just look at and say, well, nobody else is getting it done. I just need to get it done. And this is why the story of Martha and Mary just speaks volumes and resonates. Because sometimes the wait is nothing bad. Sometimes the wait is actually started out as a good thing. But our class last Sunday morning, things can start out really well, but because of how we view them and how we operate with them, It actually can turn into something that is not useful and not good and not a blessing at all. Martha did choose what was good. She chose a good thing. She served. She took care of the table. She made sure everything was ready. But that also meant that she had to say no to the Lord that was in her home. It is good to serve. And it is good to learn. We just need to be able to mature enough to know when it's time for one or the other. What is the weight that it's time to let go? The other thing that he mentions, he identifies, and he doesn't put a specific to it, he just makes a generalization so that we can fill in the blank for our life, is that sin that it ensnares us, it entangles us, it encumbers us, that sin that is there. And I wonder if he, again, doesn't mention a specific in the sense that everybody's going to struggle with some sin. Everybody's going to struggle with something. But what is it that's there? What is it that's there in your heart and your mind that just continues to be a trap over and over and over? Maybe it's not a trap because that is a play on your desire, as James would say. Maybe it's just a trap because we've never learned not to go that direction. And it continues to be a trap. It continues to ensnare and entangle us. It continues to hold us back to where we need to be when it comes to Jesus and running this race. This sin, what is it that it's time to give up? Because the hardest part of what the Hebrew writer will say in verse 1 is not the weight, it's not the sin, it's not even running the race. You know what it is? It's two words: lay aside. Lay aside. Put it to the side. At some point, there is a wisdom that can be employed, and it's a wisdom that's just common sense. This is no good for me, and this is no good for my family. And no matter how many times that I end up being trapped in this sin takes far more from me than it gives me. This sin ends up spreading and impacting my family more than what it promises to give. Again, we mentioned this last week, sin and the way that Satan portrays it, it actually does live up to what it says. It does give you what it says it'll give you. It just doesn't tell you this is a temporary thing. So whether it's tomorrow, whether it's 7 days from now, whether it's a month from now, you're going to come back to this well. And not only you're going to come back to this well, but that previous time when you only needed half a cup, you're going to now need a cup. And when you needed a cup that second time and you go back that third time, it's not going to be 2 cups. And then it just gets bigger and bigger because the sin just doesn't quite feel the way that it did before. So I need more of it and more of it. I'm a Samson that no matter who I am and what I just continue to feed more and more until finally sin, like Delilah, takes more from me than it gives me. And the Hebrew writer looks at us and says, lay it aside. Let it go. You don't need it. If it's unnecessary, why are you carrying it? And if it's ungodly, why are you embracing it? If it's unnecessary, why are you carrying it? And if it's ungodly, why are you running with it? You want a great year from a spiritual perspective? We're going to have to learn to lay aside what's unnecessary and what's ungodly for ourselves, for our family, and as a congregation. The race is already hard enough. Why would we run with the unnecessary? And why would we run with or to the ungodly? It cannot do for us. It cannot give for us what only one person can do and give. Which is why I like how the New American Standard puts it in verse 2. You need to fix your eyes on Jesus, is what he says. Whether it's by experience, whether it's through what God reveals in his word, maybe it's both. Either way, learn to look that all the promises of the unnecessary and all the promises of the ungodly, they are temporary at best, and they're empty at worst. So why don't you look and why don't you focus on the one who lives up to every single letter of every single word that he has ever spoken? And he takes you where you want to be. He takes your family where you want your family to be, and he'll take us as a church where we want to be. But we've got to fix our eyes on him. So I don't know how many of you probably have a phone that's more advanced than mine, but there are some now that when you can take your pictures on your phone, you can edit people out, you can Photoshop people out. Used to, you had to just scrub them out with whatever little marker, digital marker you had. But if you've got a more advanced phone, you can actually start Photoshop. You take a picture right there on the beach, and I don't want these people here on the peripheral. I'm just going to Photoshop them out. And I can do it in real time. I don't have to have another advanced piece of technology to do it. And I would venture to say that some of you have probably done that. You fix your eyes on Jesus, and you do so for yourself and your family. If we'll do that for ourselves as a congregation, laying aside means that we can Photoshop out and edit out the unnecessary and the ungodly, because it's not going to do any good for us. You fix your eyes on the only one who can give you what your soul, your heart, and your mind needs. This is why, just as a reminder, this time a year ago, that we were embarking on who is Jesus. And he identifies himself in so many ways that are relatable. I am the bread of life. I am the water of life. I am the light of the world. Things that we need, whether it's on a macro scale like the light of the world or on a micro scale like I'm the bread of life. It's things that we can understand, and so much that gets in the way of running the race is that we have been deceived into thinking that they provide for us what only Jesus can give. You want a great year? You want a great day? Let's just not even focus on a great year. You want just a great day? Put your absolute focus on Jesus. And it hit me earlier this week from this perspective. So there's a lot anytime I've taught this class or preached. He describes Jesus as the author and the perfecter of our faith. And why would he say this? And we normally go from the big picture, and I would think that's where he would have us go first. But if I could just shrink it and go from a small perspective, the weight that we struggle with, because we've chosen to do it, and the ungodly that we struggle with, just simply for whatever the reasons may be, we've known them since the beginning. Do you know who was before the weights? And do you know who was before the sin? And do you know who was before you stepped foot on this earth? Do you know who was before the race began? And do you know who was there before even the devil himself? He is called the author because the sin and the weights and even perhaps the stumbles and the falls of this last year, they are not the author of the race that is to come that we are running. They don't have to be the author of today's part of the race. He's the author of it. And the ones that are part of the cloud of witnesses that got up, whether they struggle with a weight or they struggled with a sin, and most likely both, it's because they kept their eyes on the one who existed before all of it. This is why fixing our eyes on Jesus means so much, because the weight's going to get the best of us this year at some point, and the sin will get the best of us this year at some point. But they don't have to have the defining moment. You fix your eyes on Jesus and you realize that His words, if you're encumbered and you're weighed down, well, why don't you just come to me? You're heavy laden, and I'll give you rest. Jesus, I'm struggling with this sin. I understand that. If you'll look to me, I'll be with you. And when you stumble and you fall, and I had a few disciples like that, there was even one who sank in the water. You know what I'll do? I'll reach out. And if you'll reach back, we'll start all over. and it's called forgiveness. Those who believe they can't be forgiven, and those who believe that there's nothing good now and in the horizon, are those who have taken their eyes off of Jesus. And that's not what He came for. And if you've taken your eyes off of Him for a little while, today's a good day to recalibrate and to reset and to refocus. It happens. Every now and then, the majority of us who own cars, we're going to have to take the car and we're going to have to make sure that everything's in alignment and that the tires are balanced. It happens. You know who's there? Jesus. Because He's the author and He's the perfecter of faith. Now, one quick word about Jesus as a reminder. Right there in the middle of this screen, in the middle of the verse, see the most important word. And it's actually not joy, and it's actually not sitting down. It's cross. Part of what happens in running the race is that I want to run the race, and I want to be faithful with Jesus, but I want to do so without a cross. There is no biblical Jesus without a cross. Jesus doesn't exist without a cross. He doesn't. And sometimes I want to run the race that doesn't include the cross. And that's a big and powerful temptation. But so Jesus, He was tempted to run the race without a cross too. The third temptation shows Him all the kingdoms. The same devil that tempts you, tempt Him. Here they are. I'll give them to you. Just fall down. No, I'm not going to do that. You only worship one. He was in effect saying, I know what He's promised you. I'll be the one to fulfill it, and I can do it without a cross. And Jesus says no. To run the race is to run with a cross. There is no such thing as a race without a cross because there is no Jesus without a cross. It's there. And in the upside down, backwards way that is faith, to run with the cross and to run with Jesus is actually at the end to find joy. Who had ever thought? I thought joy was when all the circumstances are going my way and my family is on cloud nine. I thought joy was with all of this and all of that. I'm making more money than I've ever made, and my kids are aspiring and accomplishing all their dreams, and go, that's joy. Joy is running faithfully with Jesus, but running faithfully with Jesus with a cross. There's joy in that. Because He, for the joy set before Him, endured the cross. His greatest joy was beginning and ending every day with following the Father. Your greatest joy, and it takes faith to see this, your greatest joy and mine is going to be beginning and ending every day by faithfully following Him. And when we do that, at the very end, when it's all said and done, He sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. We are never allowed to forget the resurrection. We are never allowed to forget the resurrection. We run because no matter what happens in this life, no matter how many losses are incurred along the way, the resurrection puts it all right. It makes everything right. It'll make your life right. It'll make your family right. It'll make your marriage right. It'll make your soul right. It makes everything right. You want joy? Victory? They're only found in Jesus. And we only find Jesus when we put our absolute focus on Him. So this morning, new year. I'm sure we have all sorts of goals, all sorts of resolutions. Maybe even if the resolution was not to make a resolution. But what I will say is that everybody makes a decision. And there is no greater decision than to start with Jesus. Today is the day. Now is the accepted time. And the Lord's hand is not short that it cannot save. So if you're ready, we're ready to help you. We just encourage you to hear the words of Jesus that he that believes and is baptized will be saved. And start your race with him. And finish it. And finish it well. Why don't you come as we stand and sing?